Welcome everyone to our webinar today with Honest Game. We are super excited to invite you to discuss these common myths and misconceptions surrounding student athletes, burnout, isolation, mental toughness. And then we want you to walk away with modern strategies of how to help your student athletes in their development and using mental tools to balance all the pressures that they're experiencing, from academics to athletics to social issues. And I am just incredibly honored to invite our guests, Stephanie Bernthal, who is a professional licensed counselor with an expertise in mental health, and John Harrison from Champion Forward, and of course, Ben Zobrist, MLB World Series MVP with the Chicago Cubs, is here to share his personal experiences. So I'm going to kick it over to John and Ben. We're so excited to hear you guys just chat and learn so much about your experiences. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Joyce.
Thanks, Joyce.
We're excited for today. Hopefully it'll be a content-packed 60 minutes. We've been able to connect with Stephanie, so we're excited to be doing this and to be talking about a very timely topic, a topic that is close to my heart, close to Ben's heart, to the point where we were led to launch an organization called Champion Forward, where we'll be able to share a little bit more about kind of what we do. But our real focus is helping competitors, caretakers, and coaches. So we're serving kind of the whole sports world in terms of athletes and also their caretakers or their parents, and also coaches. And we really want to do three things for them. And that's, number one, help them care for their mental health. Number two, succeed in their sport, because we all like to succeed in their sport. But also, number three, to really show up for what matters most in their life. And many times that's school, many times that's relationships, sometimes that's faith, depending on where they land. And that's our focus at Champion Forward. And so I'm excited today to hear from Ben. I get to hear from him a lot, seeing that we're partners in this initiative, but I know all of you are as well. And so, Ben, why don't we just jump right into it? I'm going to jump in with a question. You can answer however you want. You can start however you want. But I know that most of the folks today are excited to hear from you and Stephanie. So let's talk about high school. Obviously, Honest Game specializes in working with a lot of schools and organizations that focus on that high school to college transition. So why don't you talk about your high school experience? What were some memories from high school? And then maybe what was one principle that you want high school students to know that maybe you wish you would have known earlier on in your life?
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, I'm really excited to be here. I'm originally from Eureka, Illinois, downstate Illinois, small town. Eureka is just a great community. I know many of you are either community, people that are helping some of these young kids on a regular basis. If you're an administrator, coach, teacher, things like that. But then there's also probably some parents listening, and maybe the occasional athlete, if they're not in school right now. I don't know how they wouldn't be, but you never know. Could be a certain situation. But I always had great coaches, teachers, adults around me. So I was really fortunate in regards to that. And I know the kind of impact that it made on me. One of the ways that definitely impacted me was, I think as a young kid loving sports, I always felt encouraged by every coach to try a bunch of different sports. There was not one coach that ever said, hey, I need you to just do this or just do that. They were like, hey, you're one of the best athletes in our town. Play a different sport every season. So that was a big part of my experience that I think a lot of kids nowadays seem to be missing and losing. And some of it's because obviously the competition has ratcheted up over a number of years since I was a young person. But I think also a little bit of the priorities have shifted in the youth athletic realm. I do remember it being focused on, yeah, we want to win, but it was far more about developing young human beings than it was about developing champions on the field. We wanted to win championships, and we were a competitive school and a competitive team, but I don't remember there being such a huge focus on. I mean, I know there's a lot of money involved in youth sports now that wasn't back then too. So there are some big changes, but for me, my experience was a very wholesome, sporting, well-rounded, versatile experience, and I think that really played into my ability to play multiple positions at the professional level when I got there, because I was always doing different kinds of athletic activities. Now, if you look at the academic side of my experience as a high schooler, I think, academically I excelled, but a lot of that was due to just the things that my parents were teaching me. I know our school, the teachers were good teachers. The students were good students. Our community was an academic community, and yet, I think the biggest impact of that was my parents just saying, "Hey, we're not okay with you giving less than 100% in the school realm while you're doing. We know you love the athletic side of things, but you're going to give 100% in everything you do." And this is one of my principles from that point in my life that I really think is important. I've heard this said before: how you do anything is really how you do everything. And I took that to heart as a young person. And it was definitely, whether I was at school, whether I was out on the athletic field, whether I was helping with a chore at home, or whether I was at youth group or whatever it was that I was involved in, I was expected to give my best. And that was one of the most positive experiences I had as a young person.
I'm sure that principle, how you do anything is how you do everything, obviously contributed to your professional success, Ben, which we'll get into. I'm sure most of the folks from Chicago are excited to hear about that 2016 World Series. But let's talk about college. Honest Game does such a great job of equipping schools, organizations, individuals to make sure that they're academically eligible for college. There's so much pressure in today's world. The NIL, Instagram, they're facing challenges that have never been seen before. So talk a little bit about your kind of college experience. I know it's maybe a surprise to some, but you didn't have hardly any college scholarship offers. And you also transferred, which is an experience many athletes are going through today. Can you talk through what that experience was like for you?
Yeah, I didn't have any. When I graduated high school, I had no college sports scholarships offers. And I ended up going to a scout day where I got a couple of offers, one of them being Olivet Nazarene University, which is an NAIA division sports school, and went there. It was a wonderful experience. Loved it. NAIA level was great competition. I think, especially in the baseball realm, if you want to move on to another level and try to make it pro at some point, I tell kids all the time, it's far more important that you get a chance to play and continue to develop wherever you go than it is to play on TV or at the highest level that you can play. I just think you've got to play to continue to develop. And that was an opportunity I got at Olivet Nazarene. Was a pitcher, was also a position player. I did, once again, multiple things on the baseball field. I mean, I even wanted at the time to play multiple sports in college, which some guys are able to do. And that wasn't in the cards for me. I probably wasn't good enough anyways. However, I could do a lot of different things on the baseball field. And so my experience there was fantastic. And after not getting drafted my junior year and knowing that transferring was an option for me, I thought, well, if I've got one more year of baseball left, let me see if I can try to play at a different level. I had a great coach, Elliot Johnson, who had enough presence of mind and enough humility to say, all right, Ben, this may be the best thing for you. We're going to let you go test the waters elsewhere. I think that's really hard for coaches to do, especially when you got one of your best players that's asking, hey, I think I want to try to go somewhere else for my senior year. And, he allowed that to happen and gave me that ability. I know there was maybe a little more restriction at the time than there is now, but loyalty is a big thing, I know, and that's tough for coaches to think, well, are you loyal to the program? But at the end of the day, he kept in mind that, hey, Ben's future is what I need to think about in the summer, right? Like maybe in the middle of a season when the team is the team situation. Yeah, it's not about everybody as individuals in that moment. It's as the team, but the individual, the human side of things is still very, very important. And that's what I think some of my coaches allowed for that to be able to be part of the equation, and was able to transfer to a Division I school in Dallas Baptist University. Had another fantastic experience there, incredible baseball culture at that school, and ended up getting drafted out of there, which I just wasn't, my focus was not on, I've got to make it to the next level. My focus was on, okay, if I've got one more year left, where do I want to play? How do I want to play? What do I want my experience to be? And I think once again, we get caught up. A lot of parents, young competitors, and even the coaches get caught up in, are we making it to the next level? And, that was one of the blessings that I feel like at the time I understood was, I'm going to stay in the moment and I'm going to just be the best version of me today. And if I can do that and continue to develop on a day-to-day basis, that really led me into other pathways and other doors. And one of the things my parents always said to me that really mattered for me was, you know what, if it's supposed to be, it's going to be. And our faith is a big, important part of that. And that helped me keep things in perspective and keep things in balance, which is something we talk about at Champion Forward a lot.
So Ben, you and I, we've performed at a lot of different levels of sports. You maybe got a few clicks higher than I did. But one thing that we talk about a lot is you had that NAIA opportunity that led you to Division I. I had the opportunity to play a Division III sport for 4 years in college. I know Honest Game is really, really passionate about helping students understand that there's way more than just Division I. There's so many other opportunities to pursue. And you've had the opportunity to play sports at so many different levels. One thing that's common, regardless of if we're 7, 8, 9 years old up through high school, college professionals, is performance pressure, right? Your heart starts racing, the adrenaline in that moment. And so we have quite a few ADs, coaches, people in positions of leadership on the call today. Can you talk to us a little bit about performance pressure and how you handled that in your career, and maybe a principle or two that could be instilled for those folks?
Yeah, well, performance pressure is there regardless of what it could be. One of my kids having a test today at school. They're feeling a level of pressure, but it could also be, you're playing in the World Series Game 7, different levels of pressure externally. But the interesting thing about that is the way that I experienced it was very similar in certain areas of my life that seemed from the outside perspective as to be, no one's really watching, no one really cares. And then people watching, millions of people potentially watching on TV. I experienced those same events that were stressful for me in similar ways. And that, I think that's the big part of performance pressure that you kind of learn is, it doesn't really matter what other people think the pressure is supposed to feel like. It's what you are personally experiencing. That's a big principle that I've learned, especially over the last several years, doing some of the work that we've been doing and developing what we've been developing. And the pressure is internal far more than it's external. External has a part in it to play in it, 100%. That's the stimulation often, but the stimulation creates different varying levels of pressure for different types of people. And I think as a coach, as a parent, the adults around you not only contribute to what that pressure is, but they're the ones that actually give you the opportunity to know how to deal with it. So one of the ways that I dealt with it when I was a younger athlete is stay focused. I was very present-minded. I was very mindful of what my body was doing kinetically. I was focused on what the ball was doing out on the field. I was able, if I had any sort of superpower on a baseball field, it was focus. I wasn't as physically gifted as everybody else, but I did have the ability to mentally focus. Now, I wish I would have understood other parts of me that factored into that, which is part of what some of the work that we've done, and part of why I ended up experiencing some anxiety and depression, because I didn't have certain tools. And I'm not saying that having those tools fixes any of those situations necessarily. You might just have to learn to manage it in a healthy way. But what I do know is if I'd had certain tools, it would have helped. It definitely would have helped to deal with the pressure, deal with, even the highs and the lows. And, what I experienced was there was always a carrot, and I would go get those carrots. But then what happens after that as an athlete? Or you're going for it and you fail. I had a period of time when I was trying to be a major leaguer, but I kept failing and kept getting sent back down and kept hearing different things from coaches or organization and trying to figure out where I fit. And I think that's a common experience, whether you're doing it at the professional level or at the junior high level. You're experiencing that level of uncertainty, a challenge that you're not sure how to necessarily deal with, the adults are the ones that can help walk you through that. And that's something that I had some tools with, but I think I wish I'd had some of the ones that now I'm aware of.
Ben, you talked about failure, and we had the opportunity recently to speak with a director of player development for a Major League Baseball team, and he talked about the struggle that they're finding with some of this next generation that's coming in is the fact that failure is not normalized and failure is actually looked down upon. And so as these players are coming into the major leagues, they have not understood the power and the role that failure plays. And I think that's a big takeaway of what you were talking about, is just how failure actually was normalized in you in terms of the performance pressure and how that helped you to excel. I won't share this publicly, but I know that you started 0 for 13 in your first 13 at bats at the major leagues. We won't talk about that today. But I think that's a principle that we need to normalize is failure is part of the process. And it's actually a great tool to propel you forward in the mindset around failure. But one thing that you did a lot of is the opposite of fail, and that was succeed. You had a tremendous amount of achievement in your career. You played for multiple teams. You were a 3-time All-Star. You went to 3 World Series. You won 2 World Series. You were a World Series MVP for a team that hadn't won in 108 years. You won the penultimate championship. But let's talk about achievement, some of the fun side of it, and then maybe some of the unintended consequences that you experienced.
Yeah, well, anybody that's successful understands, it has been successful, understands that you've got to learn how to deal with failure in a healthy way. That's a lot of the challenge to a coach for young athletes. Like, how do you coach a kid to learn how to deal with failure in a good way, and to take it as motivation or take it as a learning experience? And different people learn that in different ways. I had a lot of success early on in my life. I didn't experience a lot of failure in junior high and high school and the competitions I was playing against. Even in college, most of the teams I was on, we won a lot. Went to NAIA World Series twice. Then at Dallas Baptist, we had a 44 win record my senior year before I got into pro ball. And even in pro ball, the teams I was on, we did a lot of winning. And I was achieving quite a bit. So it wasn't until professional baseball getting sent up and down that I started realizing, hey, maybe I won't make it. You know, you start having those doubts creep in, and the confidence that could happen early on in somebody's life. But the degree to which you learn to deal with that is the degree to which you continue to persevere and move forward, whether it's moving forward in your sport or whether it's learning how to deal with that failure and moving the same principles into a job someday or family life someday, things that where you're not always going to be perfect. And I definitely knew how to do that professionally. I'll say I knew how to, by the time I got to the World Series in 2016, I had learned how to deal with failure. And to a certain degree, you shrug your shoulder when you mess up on live TV and you drop the ball for your team and you lose games and you lose championships and you lose things. I lost some of those things early in my career, to where by the time 2016 came around, I wasn't so afraid to lose in Game 7 with the Cubs. The fear can take control when you don't know what it's like to fail. If you start getting comfortable with failure and going, well, yeah, the fear is always going to be there. I'm going to live in that tension and learn to deal with it in a healthy way. I mean, you can start to not step in with courage into those moments where things seem a little bit more pressure. And I'm like a little less worried about it. The problem for me was I didn't know what to do when it was all said and done, when it was all over and it felt like, wow, okay, I just was a hero and did everything that my team asked me to do and helped us win that championship. And then I realized when the pressure was completely off, I was starting to look around like, okay, well, then who am I when I don't have a carrot to go achieve? And I think that was the big piece for me, a big light bulb moment of, wow, I've got to develop some parts of me that since I was 5 years old, I've been developing as an athlete. But now who am I when I'm not an athlete? And I knew I was a good student, but the student part of me was way back in the past at that point, college. Now I'm a 35, 36-year-old man kind of trying to figure out who am I when I take the uniform off. So I think those things are the biggest parts of that moment that started okay, now I need to start really doing the internal work that I was unaware that I needed to do.
And Ben, you talk about that internal work. You went into some pretty challenging mental health issues after that World Series. You struggle with depression, and it's becoming such a topic to highlight. I mean, the numbers are staggering right now. I think it's 1 out of every 2 high school students are clinically diagnosed with anxiety or depression. And so that's a big passion of yours and why you've become an advocate for mental and emotional health, especially in the athletic realm. And it's so encouraging to see a hero like you. You're a hero to so many, come out and speak about your humanness. And I know that's a message that's passionate and has what fueled your passion to create Champion Forward, to be able to work with the athletes, to be able to work with the people that surround the athletes and coach the athletes, and be able to equip them with strategies to care for their mental health while succeeding on the field, which you were obviously so passionate about. You've spent the last few years of your career now on the board for a couple of mental health focused nonprofits, Counseling Center and the American Psychiatric Association Foundation. In your time of learning, being a part of those boards and the research that we've done with Champion Forward and your own experience, what would you say to athletic directors or coaches of ways that they can be involved in their students' life to make a positive impact on them?
Well, I think the biggest thing that coaches and administrators do is they provide, and this is honestly what Honest Game does as well, is providing the structure around which some of those deeper conversations can happen. If the coach doesn't do that, if the administrator doesn't allow for their coaches to do that, it makes it very difficult for a player to do it. So a competitor can really be doing their own work, and then they come into a season and a coach is expecting so much of them and leaving no space for anything else but physical work, physical skills. Administrators leaving no space for coaches except for, hey, this is the physical work we got to do. That it makes it too challenging for a young competitor to really do that work. And I would also say this, where it starts is the administrators doing their own work, with the coaches doing their own work. We just did a podcast recently with Stephanie that's going to come out, with a coach that was very important in her life that provided the space for that. So I think as parents, as coaches, as administrators, we get the opportunity to provide the structure that allows for some of this internal work and not over focusing on the external work that makes them a great external champion.
And Ben, as we kind of wrap up our time here, I want you to talk about kind of the role that administrator, that coach can play. Something that you and I talk about a lot. We maybe get into a little bit of too much information, but is this idea of attachment theory. Can you talk a little bit about that and the role that a coach or an administrator can play and the impact that can have in an athlete's life?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years talking to mental health professionals is the importance of just one adult in a young competitor's life can make the biggest difference, right? So you might think, oh, everybody else around me, it's just such a toxic atmosphere and I don't know what I'm doing and I'm challenged. Well, all it is if you do your work and you're prepared to be healthily attachable by a young athlete or by your coaches in your organization or by the people around you, I think you provide the space in that relationship. So if it's one coach, your team's going to start really getting it. If it's one administrator, your coaches are going to start getting it. Your teachers are going to start getting it. If it's one parent, your kids are still going to get it. That's the beauty of this, is all it takes is one person to make that big, big difference. And we talk a lot in Champion Forward about connection. That's one of our main tenets. How do you connect healthily to yourself? How do you connect to the people in your life? We want them to have healthy connections with their coaches, with their parents, with just anybody in their life. And sometimes it's a professional. It's at the level where you really need to talk to somebody like Stephanie. You really need to talk to an organization like Honest Game that really has some facilitators that can facilitate some of those conversations. And when you decide that you're going to do that and you make it a priority to connect in a healthy way, it makes a huge difference. And it starts with the adults have to do it. If you think this is just for the kids, this is just for the athletes, That's the problem. I think that's part of our problem is we're like, oh no, I'm beyond that. I'm good. This is for my kid. It's like, no, I have to continue to do the work on a regular basis to be ready to handle the challenges that are coming at me.
And Ben, you talked about connection, which is such an important tenet to our organization and to really life and success on and off the field. We talk about awareness, balance, and connection a lot at Champion Forward. The power of awareness, self-awareness, the power of balance, creating balance in your life to prevent burnout, and then ultimately the power of connection, connecting to yourself, connecting to others. And you talk about doing your own work and what that looks like. And now we're going to transition to Stephanie, who has been such a profound connection that you and I have gotten to know. And she happens to lie at the awesome concentric circle nexus of she had an experience as a player. She had a lot of experience as a coach. And she said, I want to help these coaches. I want to help players. I want to help schools kind of with the mental health side. And so she has almost all the bases covered and now serves in her role with Beyond Sport Coaching, to where she's working with parents, with players, with coaches. And when you talk about doing your own work, she's just one of many professionals who's very talented, skilled, experienced that can do that. So Stephanie, we'd like to hear from you just for a few minutes. If you could talk a little bit about how could you nurture the development of athletes in your experience?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, first of all, how valuable all of that was from Ben, John as well. And just highlighting too, I think part of my evolution from being a coach a couple of years ago at the Division I level to what I'm doing now and returning sort of to my initial career path as a licensed counselor and working in the mental health field was starting to pay attention to my own feelings and my own thoughts as a coach, the pressures I was feeling, the system I was in, and starting to know, where can I best contribute? And that started to not be so much of a fit for me as a head coach anymore, which was even shocking to me. Like, oh my gosh, what is happening? But I really started feeling more alive to what I was hearing from my athletes in my meetings with them, in creating the space like John and Ben, you guys talked about, and hearing the tremendous pressure, I will be honest, I did not experience. That was coming from different places than I had ever been aware of. And so I had this interesting journey where I'm like, okay, I need to win as a head coach, right? That's what I'm paid to do. I don't have bonuses and measurables and all these things for just having athletes who become great people. But really, that's why I got into this. And I'm feeling this tension in, pursuing wins, going over the X's and O's, doing all the film, but I'm having an athlete who can't stay awake in film, or I'm having an athlete who can't wake up to go to class, or is missing workouts, or just these behavioral things that I had clinical knowledge of. Oh my goodness, something else is showing up here that I could be really frustrated about from a team management standpoint. But this is an opportunity for a conversation and an intervention potentially to me as an adult saying, hey, I wonder if you've thought about if this was less of a challenge or a struggle, if maybe you are trying, but there might be some other things to put in place to help with the academic success, or to be able to show up for the bus for that trip. So now we're not stressed, feeling bad, apologizing to the team. Things maybe you guys aren't aware. You think maybe they only show up in high school. They show up everywhere. At the levels beyond. So I would encourage all of you at the levels you're at. We can feel like we just want to get people to the next step athletically without some of these friction points that come up, us stepping into those and having challenging conversations. What's allowed me to have those conversations, and I have not been perfect, you guys, is really what I learned as a counselor, is let me be curious and let me create a trusting connection here where there's an opportunity beyond me making playing time decisions, which was this really hard tension as a coach. But to say, I actually care about your life. I care about, when you have a job someday and this being your boss you're talking to, not me, your coach. I have an opportunity to help. You have the most support in your life right now of people who care about you and resources that are maybe even free from our university.
Steph, I think that we can pull like your experiences are so incredible and you have so much to share. And I was thinking of what Ben was saying about the adults in the village and how a coach, right? Like we have an athletic director in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Erica Turner, who says, don't underestimate your power of influence as a coach, as a school staff member, right? And you talk a lot about the relational piggy bank. Can you sort of get into that? Because I think it'd be really interesting for our listeners to hear about.
Yeah. It's something an assistant of mine said, and it put words to something I, did as a counselor and I brought into coaching. But she said, a lot of times we focus on these hard conversations with our athletes, telling them what to do, telling them what to do better. But we gain that ability when we make deposits, little deposits, moment after moment into this relational piggy bank. And they might seem benign, they might seem little, but it's the good morning when we had practice at 6:45 in the morning to every athlete. It's, have a great day. It's asking about the test. It was all those moments where as adults, we can be busy or we could be outcome based or we could be stressed, but to take time and to show that we care. And this generation says, I don't know what the quote is exactly, but I don't really care what you know until I know that you care. And so starting from that place of, I just gave respect. That was my generation. That's how I was. I have to understand as an adult, I need to facilitate and build a relational bridge to allow for, some of those moments that are a little more difficult or challenging, and balance that, keep that balance going, which is a really big challenge when you're in a teaching, a coaching, sort of an enforcement type of role. I'm more of an enforcer personality, so I really have to balance that out with encouragement. That's where being a counselor was just so powerful for me. So I think that, and I really want to stress to those on this call, just a total light bulb moment for me was I always just thought I was mentally tough. I'm like, I just have it, I have that skill set. Well, as Ben so beautifully described, he's able to unpack, wow, these are the moments that helped build resilience, some autonomy, some responsibility on his pathway, feelings of success, feelings of, I've had failure. How do I sort of problem solve here? That's a process. We might think when we get older, we had it the whole time. But there were people who helped cultivate that in us and moments for us that are critical. And so we might be crossing paths with someone at that critical point. And it's musculature that's built. Just like when my freshmen came to campus, by the way, many of them hadn't lifted a weight. I hadn't lifted weights. Our strength coach didn't go tell them to max out. It's unhealthy. They couldn't do it. They didn't have the form. They didn't have the musculature to handle it. Emotionally, with what these young people are dealing with from all sides of their life, they need opportunities to build that musculature, that flexibility, that emotional endurance and capacity to handle more and more. And one of the things.
Sorry to interrupt. I just think what's interesting is like looks like we have some student athletes on listening too. Is this concept of the village again, right? Like everyone is under a lot of pressure. Coaches, teachers, counselors, ADs with expectations as well. And now you have this modern day coaching style. What's acceptable to say? What sort of punishment is allowed? And am I going to say something wrong that's going to get me in trouble? But in the end, all of these pressures can be alleviated if we invite the village in, right? So like talk about silos and how we sort of all think like, if I just do my job, I'm going to get my kids to the next level, or I'm going to help my students. But how can school staff and the adults in the village invite the village in to take some pressure off, but also maximize impact on their students?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with knowledge of our experiences and stepping into those conversations with each other. That started to happen at the college level for me. People were coming to me saying, "Hey, you have this lens. You know, I'm a gymnastics coach, or I'm a swimming and diving coach, and I've never had an athlete with a panic attack. This is my best athlete. I don't even understand, you know, I've never dealt with this." And so I could say, well, here are the limitations of what I could share with you, but here are other places where you can also get information about that, and places on campus. And maybe we need to have conversations, you know, as head coaches. And so we start the conversation where I think we have this mentality in athletics. I have to fight it too. Of I just have to sort of work this out internally. And it's vulnerable and it's scary to share these things with other people. So as an individual, you have to find places that are safe to do that within your community. You're a competitor. If you're a coach, your competitors may not be that space. You know, it may be a different place. But you have to find those, and then you have to really listen, receive, and process, and make game plans to address these things. Just like you make a game plan, you know, to go out and beat an opponent or to get better as an athlete. We can elevate, you know, all these areas at the same time, I really believe, without leaving one behind.
Yeah, when you talk about game plans, there's some really great questions coming in about examples and you know, tangible things that our listeners can execute on, right? Like maybe like visualization methods, like a team event where we all sit together and we all visualize together to ourselves. Can you give some like maybe 2 or 3 examples of things that our listeners can execute to get that journey started?
Yeah, I would say the very first thing is creating and facilitating connection amongst your group. Because a lot of things, if you try to just open some sort of thing that can create vulnerability, there isn't a feeling of safety to pursue that amongst the group. So I think that has to be the starting place, is that connection piece Champion Forward talks about. And yeah, there's a mind, heart, body connection. So our breathing is connected physiologically to what's happening in our body. Ben knows that from stepping up to bat. You know, if you change your breathing, if you close your eyes, if you go through your mental tape of what's happening in your mind intentionally, that changes how you hold your bat, how you swing, how you throw a pitch. All those things are true. There's science behind it. And that's where those performance folks are fantastic. What I don't want to leave behind here, though, is there's so much more than the performance measurables. There's also this space of what you go home to, what's in your mind when you're by yourself, what you're consuming. Oh my goodness. If I just wake up and go on my phone, my mood's different in the day. You know, do I make time for disciplines that feed me? Going for a walk. Now that I left college coaching, it's the first time I noticed the leaves in fall. I was so busy. I didn't even notice things like that. That's probably not great balance, you know, but it's hard. So I would encourage people in that space to stop. We can slow the speed of the treadmill we're on. It doesn't have to be the highest speed. We can stay on it and keep climbing, you know, and working, but it doesn't have to be a full sprint. all the time. That's not realistic. And I think Ben talked about, you know, there's nothing wrong with you if you're feeling like, gosh, I need a break. Like my body, my mind, my heart are telling me I've got to listen to this right now. And I think we need to create space for that conversation, not, oh, you may not be locked in. Like, oh, Ben, you just won a World Series. You're not locked in. That's not what was happening there. It's a totally different conversation about
Stephanie,
burnout.
I just want to add one thing there because you talked about the power of taking a break. And I think what we see today in the academic and especially athletic landscape is this fear that if I take a break, I'm going to get behind and I'll never catch up. And I just want to throw a quick point in. We just had the opportunity to interview JC Carroll on our podcast. And if you haven't heard his name before, JC is the second all-time leader in NCAA three-point percentage from a basketball perspective. I believe two-time honorable mention All-American and went to Utah State. So very, not necessarily a basketball perennial powerhouse. And he actually, between high school and college, because of his faith, took a 2-year break to go and volunteer. And that would be like career suicide. And what we're thinking about today is you're going to take 2 years off from your sport when you're supposed to be so dedicated. And yet he went and had a tremendous 4-year career and then a 12-year career playing professionally. And I think that he's just a testament to the power of, if you feel like you need a break, a week off or 2 weeks off, that isn't going to derail you. That's actually a myth that exists that we need to just not be feeding into. And so I think that was a great point that you had there, Stephanie. It's okay to take a break.
Yeah. And just to add to that, you think about, in my years of coaching, you think about the kids who got injured and they were like, that's it. My life's over. I have no identity. And then they come back, right? They do PT, they get back because they're determined, and they come back with this fresh mindset of like, I missed this, right? I missed being out here. And they can sort of come back as a different person. I mean, Ben, I'm sure you have experiences to share where maybe you were out for a bit and you took a break. And how did you feel when you came back?
Well, I think that's always the challenge when I played baseball was off season and in season. And there was always a period of time after the season where you kind of have to decompress and get away from like all the performance. And it would take me 2 or 3 weeks to really like come down from that. And those of you that are coaches, it's a weird feeling, right? When the season's over and the athletes go away and you're like, okay, what do I do with myself? You've been so furiously busy that now that downtime, but let me just tell you like how important that time is. It's not only important to rest and get away and maybe you need to veg out a little bit. I'm not saying it's wrong to watch a movie here or there, to just kind of relax. But at some level, you need to get into some solitude and be quiet enough. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, Stephanie, is taking a break and taking some time for solitude and not trying to get ahead in that moment, but actually you're getting ahead. You're getting ahead by adding some silence into your life. It's really tough to do that when you're a very busy person. You're a parent. I get it. It's like you have no time in the day to do that. But just taking an hour here or there to take a walk and not listen to music, or maybe the music does help, but it could be just a walk in the woods. For me, that's a big thing that helps me. And I did some of those things without realizing what I was doing. And now I'm just a lot more intentional. When I start feeling overwhelmed, it's like, okay, where in my schedule can I find that? I get grounded again and get back to a level of, okay, I got to slow the meetings down, slow the amount of conversations down sometimes to just get reconnected to myself, reconnected to my faith and the values that are really, really important to me.
Yeah, we talk about taking a break. You had mentioned a media fast, right? Like now people are so plugged in constantly, and it may not be a super popular idea with our students, but what do you think of that sort of challenge giving to coaching staff or, students and how that will play?
Well, if you really want to be a strong leader, okay, you really want to be a strong leader, parent, coach, administrator, whatever you are, even athlete, you got to be willing to do things that are hard. And one of the things that's hard to do is to tell your team, hey, we're actually going to take 10 minutes at the end of this practice. And I know you're done and you don't want to do anything, but we're going to do some of our curriculum around being a balanced human being, right? This things like Stephanie, things you recognized while you were a coach that, wow, some of these kids need some other work. There's more to life than just performing out on the field. So you as a coach or administrator, as a parent, you actually set that structure. And you know what? It's unpopular at the moment. Nobody likes doing it. Nobody wants to do it. You don't even probably want to do it. But that's the tough, hard that's why we call it work, because it's still work. It's not easy, but it's the kind of work that reaps far more benefits in the end. And, like with my kids, if I ask them to do a media fast for a number of days, guess what? They usually hate it at the beginning. And then by the end, they're a more whole human being. And our connections are better than they've ever been. And we actually dig into the actual nuts and bolts of a relationship and build a sense of solid movement in the right direction. That's the biggest thing. You just have to be willing to do the hard things that are really going to benefit you, as long as you see that it's going to benefit you.
Stephanie, we have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say a piece of that, Ben touched on something so important there. And when you are young, you're formulating your identity, so that's also something that's hard for us to remember as we get older. And we still are too. We're still growing and learning, but messages are coming your way at every moment. And so having the ability to discern who am I in the spaces I am in, and what Ben even said, what are my values? What are the things that make me tick, that are so important to me? It's hard to do that when there's so much noise in your life and there's so much. Could be a parent. I didn't have that experience. I had parents who sort of let me grow in a lot of ways, but I am convicted of that at points with people in my life. Am I adding messages that aren't theirs, And so I think just creating space to say, what am I even thinking, feeling? What's important to me? What makes me tick? That's a process, and that's an evolving process in life. It's very hard to do as humans when we have so many things coming at us. So it's a great discipline to foster that.
That's an awesome sort of exercise to do, right? With a group or little homework, or let's do it together. Let's write down, what are your values? What do you care about, right? And having a student sit down and think about that, it's like pretty deep, as they would say, but I think, it's a really effective exercise. There's a couple themes coming in through our questions, and I'd love to address them. Thinking about the pressures, right? Ben, you talked about those external and internal pressures. And we've talked about multiple sports and how that can be really helpful. So there's one question I think is really interesting. Is it better for an athlete to play one sport in order to have time to decompress? Because the argument is, right, if you're playing 3 sports, you're running from one season to the next, or you might have 2 practices on the same day in 2 different sports. How do you find a time to take breaks? Ben, do you want to jump in, and then Stephanie can take it back?
Yeah, I think you find the time to take breaks. If you're doing multiple sports, you have to make sure that there is a dead period in there somewhere. There's got to be. If there's no dead period, that's the biggest issue to pay attention to. That can happen in one sport or multiple sports. It's really not the amount of sports you're playing. It's about, are you taking a little bit of time away from any sport to where you're developing a sense of self off of an athletic context, completely off. That's the biggest thing that I think parents or coaches need to pay attention to. And then versatility is just, hey, if you can be not just a versatile player in one sport or a versatile player in multiple sports, but a versatile human being, right? That's kind of what we're trying to build with Champion Forward stuff.
Yeah, I would share. I mean, this is just a huge part of my story. And it was that my parents empowered me to choose the speed of the multiple things I did. So I played piano. I said, I don't want to take piano lessons. Guess what? I did it on my own. I had fun tinkering around on my own. They didn't say, well, you're so good at this, you need to go be a classical pianist. And I'm like, in first grade, I'm like, I don't want to do that. It was still fun for me. I played softball my whole life. Field hockey was my sport I ended up being a college coach in. My high school varsity coach said, hey, if you don't do club, you're not going to make varsity field hockey. And I said, you know what? I miss some really important things in my faith life half of the year for softball. As a freshman, I just said to her, this is not something I can do at that level all year round. My parents, I went back to them. I'm like, what do I do? I'm terrified. And they're like, you know what? Just do what you can do. And they said, do you want to do that? Because if you want to shift to field hockey, we're going to have to make some different decisions for your softball commitment, because you can't do both at that level and have these other things if those are what you want. And so the power to say no and the courage my parents showed in that moment to me of just saying, you know what, that's going to work out. And that helped me realize my passion was the most important part of my athletic ability. And so if I was running around and just going through the motions, I was very average. As a coach, I was very average. So I had to take time and I had to dial back certain things at certain points. So when I went 100% in. And I'm really thankful those adults gave me a vocabulary for something I didn't know was possible.
Yeah, another great question we got was, how do you identify burnout in a student, right? Like, what are some red flags to look out for? Because, a lot of us went through that, right?
Yeah.
And sort of disengage, or, what are some red flags that you can help people identify?
Joyce, this is so important for the adults, because I so often caught myself as a coach frustrated of people going through the motions. As I said, I was a passion-based player, and coach. So when I saw that lackadaisical approach in practice, I'm like, someone's not taking the moment, someone's not cherishing it. That was my stuff. That was my, little nerve that got hit. But in reality, I, again, had to get to the story. What's happening? What's going on? Why is this showing up in this way? And realistically, like, I had days like that too. I probably don't think I did. But, where can I ask some questions here about what's going on and express, hey, this is kind of what I'm seeing. And I would do that after each season as a college coach. I'd have meetings throughout the season, and I would specifically ask, how is your mental health? When are you most motivated? I'd ask open-ended questions. When is your focus your best and your worst? So I could understand, how are these things showing up? Am I contributing as a coach? Because I might be in some ways. My structure might be, we might need to take a break in the amount of hours we use or what we're doing, not just work harder or study more or do more. That's really hard to recognize unless you start taking a pulse check.
Yeah, think about how we all start to go through the motions, right? You go through the motions on your day to day, and then you're not being present. And one thing I always said to my kids, I said to my own kids, is play every day like it's your last, right? Like, it's all sort of minute, and depending on how far you go, every day could be the last day you get to play with this team, or the last day you get to play at that level. Or Ben sort of looks like nostalgic, like, yeah, I remember, like, it's sort of, I'd love to hear, Ben, what your mentality about that when you were out there, and how you sort of made sure you were present every day.
Yeah. I did think about that, hey, if this is the last day that I get to play, am I giving it my all? I think that the challenge to that, and the tension that now I understand, is If you do that, sometimes that means you're going to squeeze every ounce of whatever ability you have that day out of you. And guess what? You have nothing tomorrow to give because you just push yourself a little further than you were capable of. And I think recognizing limitation is a really hard thing for an athlete or a coach or anybody in the sporting realm to do. And, one of the things when we're working with emotions, we talk about a level of healthy shame is the word we use. I know people hate that word, but the idea, the psychologist that came up with it said, really what that is an understanding that, hey, I can't do everything for everyone, So if I'm going to have the legs to put the same best effort out there every day, well, I've got to leave something in the tank, a little bit in the tank, so that when I rest and knowing your rest, if you pay attention to your rest, you're leaving a little bit in the tank, then you go rest and you get the tank back filled. But if you empty the tank completely one day and then you get your rest, you're still not going to be at your best the next day. You want to start the day at your 100% if you can. And sometimes you're just not going to be at 100%. And you got to give what you got. But if I've got 80% that day because I pushed myself too hard, well, I got to still leave 20%. I can only give what I can give that day because I know it's coming again tomorrow. And as a baseball player, you kind of learn what you can and can't handle because we're playing games every day in Major League Baseball. I don't think that kids know how to do that. I honestly don't think a lot of adults know how to do that. We all need to work on what is our level of where am I at today and what do I have to give? And then leaving a little bit in the tank so that when I go rest and go get what I need, I can come back at it with a full tank.
That's huge. I mean, think about having that conversation with students, right? Like they don't understand the marathon mentality, right? Like, no, it's not a sprint. Like we have to live our lives. We have to try to, accomplish a little bit here, there, right? We have a really good question from the parent side, from how schools can work with parents, right? The parent-guardian expectations of results is tough. And how do coaches and administrators and counselors communicate the difference between process versus outcome? Stephanie, I don't know, or Ben, like you guys can sort of popcorn it, but it's a really great question because obviously the dynamic is really challenging.
Yeah. And I have so much empathy for administrators. That was my direct report, direct boss. People don't realize when you're a college coach is your administrator, so that relationship is so important. Your career is essentially, based on that healthiness of that relationship and that philosophy and the ability to tackle things, in a really collaborative way. And the decision-making at that level, I would just remind people you can never win. You can never win. There's so many challenges. There's so many, you're trying to choose the best situation for a lot of things. And, they are taking in a lot of pressure themselves as far as measurables, but also this idea of like fostering growth and how do we hold that intention? And so I think communication, that's a piece, like sometimes people outsource to someone like myself to help facilitate from their school or their group to parents. Hey, here are some really healthy ways to interact, to understand, to have a good lens on this and to normalize things, because it's always a little hard for us to hear from the party making the decisions, I think. So sometimes we do need that buffer kind of neutral party to deliver information and to help us sort of remain in the realm of, we all have emotions. We all get inflamed by situations. There's a lot of that in sport. There's a lot of passion and a lot of investment. And so I think being able to have those really healthy, logical conversations about just what the research says, which is what Champion Forward does a really good job of. And that sometimes has to come from sort of a neutral party where there isn't this interplay involved.
I want to address I know we're running short of time. We're almost done, but I want to address the hierarchy of relationship, if there is one. In regard to that, you got the competitor, then you got the caretaker, then you got the coach, and then you got the administrator of the organization, whatever the organization is. And those need to be channels that, the athlete needs to talk to the parent, the caretaker first, and not go over the parent's head and go to the coach technically. I know sometimes the coach is the closest person in the moment that needs to talk to them. I get that. But if there's a person in between there that needs to hear about that, obviously a coach, this, Stephanie, you would encourage that young competitor to talk to their caretaker about things. You don't just do a relationship with them and on a mental health issue, on a challenge that they're dealing with, and leave the parent completely out. Same thing goes if a parent's upset with a coach or upset with an administrator. You don't go down the chain and go talk to the competitor, or go up the chain and go over the coach's head to the administrator. That causes more problems. So to keep the line of communication clear, if there's a problem, go to the person first that you have the problem with, and then immediately connect the other links of the chain. I think that's the only way, if you want the whole village to come around whatever the issue is and deal with it in a healthy way. You got to get everybody on that same communication plane. I think that's the biggest problem I see with communication and conflict in some of those relationships, whether you're a parent, a competitor, coach, administrator. That's where all that kind of gets muddied.
This is such a good point. I mean, you think about the silos that we all live in, and if everybody worked together, it would reduce anxiety. It would allow that student to see oh, I have a team behind me. I'm not alone, right? Everybody wants to help me, and then they feel like they can succeed. Well, I know we're running out of time. John, I wanted to give you a chance to close out. Ben, we are so grateful to have had you here. Stephanie, all of your tidbits of knowledge are so interesting. I've taken so many notes. It's been really fun to learn from both of you. So John from Champion Forward, please, share your closeout. And we're so grateful to everyone who came to listen today.
I'm sad the time is ending. I think we could keep going for a while, and this is so valuable. As I mentioned, just the topic is right there. And the title of this webinar today was The Power of a Pathway. And I think whether it's Stephanie or Honest Game or Champion Forward, we really have a heart for providing pathways for these student athletes, for the caretakers, for the coaches, to be able to care for their mental health, to be able to be effective in their sport, and to be able to even be effective in their sport. It starts with being academically eligible. And that's what Honest Game is doing an amazing job of providing the software, providing the roadmap, which I wish I would have had at that age in my life, to be able to know what to do. And with Stephanie, being able to work alongside professionals like that. At Champion Forward, we're working with organizations, we're working with schools, we're working with teams. You can connect with us at connect.championforward.org. We could do webinars like this. We're doing speaking engagements. We're kind of serving this ecosystem, if you will. And we'd love to have conversations about how Ben and our team could be utilizing the materials that we've created with your team, with your schools as well. We're also a nonprofit, so we are continuing to grow, hire, aggregate resources. So if you're interested in supporting us, you can visit donate.championforward.org. We're aggregating, as I said, resources and people, because the public outcry has been a little bit overwhelming, to be honest, when Ben went public with his platform. And this is a problem that we're all trying to work together, not necessarily to solve, because it's a big problem to solve, but to provide tools to be in the toolbox for when those difficult times come. And we're just so grateful to Honest Game and the team, not only Joyce, but Kristen and Barb and the whole behind the scenes team for putting this on. Thanks for all the attendees and for giving Ben and I the opportunity to be a part.
Thank you all. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.